I thought I was doing everything right. Where did I go wrong? The question that we all tend to ask, that I was asking too, is why? Why this, why that? And not understanding. And still to this day, not understanding much of it.
Why is a normal question, and it's one we ask a lot, but it's not very useful.
I mean, I ended up in the hospital for 2 months, almost dead. There were guys that I was with in the Special Forces and the Green Berets for years, deployed with, been in combat with, that I hadn't heard from for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up in the hospital, and within a week, there were probably a dozen of those guys who drove from South Alabama. I don't want to get emotional here, but
No, it's perfectly
drove
fine.
from South Alabama to come to my hospital room when people from my church wouldn't drive 15 minutes. I think those experiences at first made me bitter and resentful, but coming out of it, I think they've made me into a more gracious, more grateful friend.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition. Welcome back to the Life in Transition podcast. I'm very excited today to have with me a new friend of mine who's Dr. Omar Hamada. He is a biotech entrepreneur, a longevity doctor and surgeon, but that's not enough. As an educator, he's a special ops combat veteran, theologian, musician, and active father. Dr. Hamada, or Omar, very much welcome to the Life in Transition podcast. I'm really glad that you're here.
Thanks, Art. Me too. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you and your audience.
Thank you so much. So jumping right in, what would you consider to be the most meaningful or the biggest impact transition that you've been through in your life?
That's a really hard question because there are so many transitions in life. In fact, you can look on a day-to-day basis and there are micro transitions everywhere we look. But I'd say the most impactful transitions, and as a result, meaningful, unfortunately, I think for many of us tend to be negative initially, but then they turn into positives unless we allow them to stay negative and just live in that rut. For me, unfortunately, part of my story is that I went through a divorce about 5, 6 years ago. And it was all also around the time of my own father's death and my father-in-law's death. It all sort of happened at the same time, along with business failure, health issues in my own life that I didn't see coming, sort of everything all at once. And, I think I've been through rough transitions before, as we all have in life. But I think that was the most impactful because of how widespread it was and how all encompassing it was.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of stuff going on all at once. And this is about 5 years ago, right?
Started, I think, it was actually 2017 through 2020, that whole period. And then, I've always been a strong guy and, like many of us, sort of alpha male and resilient and figuring, I can recover from anything pretty quickly, bounce back. But I didn't recognize the damage that all that did on a deep emotional and spiritual level that really took me years to recover from. I thought I'll bounce back quickly, physically, emotionally, everything within a year, but I'd say it probably took a good 5 years.
And did you, like when I think about this, like, was it really the damage that was done in those transitions that you had to bounce back from? Or were there patterns, were there things that you had been ignoring that had led up to that had sort of done the damage over time that then you recognized at some point?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'd say both.
Okay.
I'd say both. But, we do tend to have certain patterns that we live in that do affect our outcomes. And sometimes we recognize them and sometimes we don't. Sometimes other people see them and sometimes they don't. And I think for me, many of those, I'd say, were probably recognized, but I would try to compensate or rationalize or excuse to try to keep peace and keep things together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's they all certainly contributed.
A lot of people think that, transitions are fast. That's one of the big mistakes because they're not. As you said, it actually takes years. And they also usually think that they begin with a beginning,
Yeah,
but they actually begin with an ending, right? Something ends, whether it's a marriage, a career, a health, a vitality, right? Something ends that triggers us to notice and to be curious and to question what's going on. So you had transitions of a divorce, losing a father and a father-in-law. And I assume the father-in-law wasn't just to the divorce, but actually he also passed during that time.
right. He did, and he was a good man, and we were close, and that was part of, I think, the impact of all of it.
Yeah. And then a business failure at the same time.
Yeah,
So, the
and health,
image and what's that?
and health,
And health,
either
right?
either as
So,
a consequence of all that or as part of it.
yeah, exactly. And for somebody who's in the space of health, and who I know and see as a super robust, healthy, energetic man, having all of that go on at the same time, how did that affect your own concept of yourself? Did you start to question everything, or did you have enough faith or know who you are enough in God to be okay? How did that, I mean, with all of that going on at once, what was your mental state like?
Well, it was difficult. In fact, just being transparent, it was devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And not so much in myself. I think, I've always had a good level of confidence, I think, in who God made me
Mm-hmm.
and the gifts He's given me. But I think just a lot of questions of what happened. I thought I was doing everything right. Where did I go wrong? How do I recover? But a lot of it, I'd say for me personally, the biggest impact were the relationships around all of this and the failures of many of them. And the question that we all tend to ask, that I was asking too, is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why this, why that? And not understanding. And still to this day, not understanding much of it. But, I think just relinquishing the need to understand a lot of things that are beyond understanding
Yeah,
and
to
beyond my
know why. I mean,
control.
why is a normal question,
Yeah.
and it's one we ask a lot, but it's not very useful in my experience,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Because
true.
it's a way of getting stuck and blaming and trying to figure out instead of how do I move forward from here? Now that I see the mess that I'm in, how can I best take action to make it better, to start cleaning it up, to start rebuilding my health and my relationships and so forth?
Yeah.
So why is
It's so true.
it's a common question. It's a sort of sexy question. It's a blame question, but it doesn't, whether you ever get the answer or not, it doesn't actually help so much.
And it's a fixed question. I think for a lot of us men, we want to fix the problem. I mean, it's
That's
like,
right.
show me where this went wrong and I'll fix it.
That's
But a
right.
lot of times we can't figure it out.
Yeah.
There's not an answer, or it's beyond our control or sphere of knowledge. So
Yeah, which is something we often don't like to admit either. I want to dig in though. You said it was really devastating on the relationships. So clearly, if you got divorced, it was really devastating on the relationship with your wife. What are the other relationships, or your ex wife now, but what are the other relationships, Omar, that were really damaged during this time?
this is hard, but I think it will resonate with many. I'd say almost all relationships.
Mm,
And I don't know why. A lot of it is my dad told me when I was younger, he said, when things are going well and you're successful and doing well, you'll have a lot of friends and they will always be around and, supportive. But if you trip or slip or something goes wrong, most all of them will disappear. And
mm. And you
that's what I
find out who your
found.
true friends are.
Right. And that was one of the most devastating things to me. It's like, where did everybody go? The abandonment, the
Mm,
wow, he's going through all this stuff, and I don't know if there's probably some level of discomfort, like people not knowing how to
Sure.
address it or what to say. But also, I think on the other side, there are some that are just in it for what they can get out of it, and if they can't get anything out of it, then they move on.
So you went through the phase here where you felt like really like many of your relationships. So your wife, was it also your children, other family members that felt more distant, less connected?
Just about all of them. I mean,
And then also all your friendships as well.
my sibling, my kids, friendships, church. I'd been in the same church for 15 years and was a lay leader of the church, teaching Bible studies, very visible. And when all this started happening, I mean, I ended up in the hospital for 2 months, almost dead, with the health
Wow.
issue. I'd say three people and I knew several hundred,
Right.
checked in during the whole
Wow.
time.
Wow.
That was difficult, thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
you pour your
And
life
that
into
wasn't during COVID or something where they
no, it
had a
wasn't
reason that
during
they couldn't come see you.
yeah, you pour your
I was
life
trying to
into
give
a
you an out
community.
there,
That's
but
right. Yeah, it felt global. It felt
mm.
near global.
I mean, obviously, some of that is like you said that some people are just uncomfortable, and they don't know how to handle tough situations. And quite frankly, I talk a lot in business about courageous conversations, and say courageous conversations are caring enough about the other to be honest, caring more about the other person than your own comfort,
Yeah,
because you have to overcome your comfort. You have to get outside your comfort zone. You have to do what's uncomfortable to have real conversations and to be with people when they're suffering.
right.
Right? It's not comfortable, but that's the honor. I mean, the deep honor of being a true friend is to be able to be called on in that situation. But my question is, I mean, obviously some were in that way. And if you had all of this unraveling at the same time, that's incredibly difficult. How much of that was, do you feel that just everybody else stepping away from you? And how much of it was your perception? Like, because, you were also going through all this stuff that, how much of it was your glasses, your paradigm that was coloring it? How much was really everybody stepping away from you?
I think it was real, more than just
Okay.
perception. In fact, there was a men's group that I was a part of, and when I finally made it back to that, nobody had reached out from that group, even though I'd been part of it for a while.
Wow.
When I went back to it, the guy who was leading it actually said, the first time I went back, actually said, I was really expecting to hear that you'd put a gun to your head and pulled the trigger. And I was like, wow. And you
and he
never
never,
called.
I mean, that's,
Right. So I was
that's
like,
effing amazing.
well,
Pardon my
that's
French, but holy shit. I mean,
right.
that's not a
So,
men's group I want to be part of. Sorry
right.
to say.
I'm no longer.
Yeah.
But that was kind of actually pretty reflective of most of those relationships. And nobody said that but him. Um, but I felt like, that's sort of where things were.
Have you, it's two things that's coming up for me right now, but the first one is, have you made, have you made amends, and not made amends like you had to make amends? Have you reconnected, and are some of those relationships back strong? And have you had the conversation about what happened when you were walking on the beach and it's only one set of footprints, if you will,
Yeah.
and felt like it was your own, right?
Some of them still, I mean, there's no contact for some reason. I don't know why. I'm very relational, so I'm always willing to reach out. But for example, I just heard from a guy that I hadn't heard from since then. It's been several years, and
Right.
he just moved to the area and texted me, and I was like, wow, where'd that come from? So I think some people are starting to reach back out, but there's a level of trust, right? It's like, now that I'm back
Absolutely.
on my feet, successful again, now they're reconnecting. But when
Yeah.
I
And that
was,
feels, the story I
yeah,
could tell myself about that is it's disingenuous, right? That
right,
how can
yeah,
I help them, or what can they get from me?
right. So where are the real friends?
Yeah.
And so so I've got trust issues there, right? I'm willing to reconnect. I'm willing to forgive, but there are trust issues. Like, is this true? And
Right.
how long are you going to be here?
Yeah. And I mean, I asked this question to myself a lot with, Arthur Brooks. Are they deal friends or are they real friends?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can remember when in the middle of my career, I quit a pretty high powerful job in a company, and it was interesting to me to see the people that I thought were my friends that were not.
Yeah.
And the people also is equally interesting. People I didn't realize my friends that were.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And that was huge. I mean, there were some folks that came close that I would not have ever expected. People I knew peripherally,
Right.
people that didn't agree with, our worldviews were different.
Yeah.
That we weren't of like faith.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of them were atheists.
Yep.
And they're the ones who pulled in.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
Christian friends are the ones who left. And I found that really remarkable. I was like, wow.
Unfortunately, Christianity is often an exclusivity club
Yeah.
and not seeing Christ in everything, which is what he commands us to do. Not just everyone, but in everything.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that can be the case, right? So,
But I'll tell you what that's done for me.
Yeah.
That's made me
Yeah.
hypersensitive to how I interact with other people. How good of a friend am I?
Yeah.
Is it just something I say, or am I really there for them when they're hurting? And, I think there's a difference between enabling behavior that
Oh, yeah.
is bad, or behavior that's not, or attitudes that are not going to result in good outcomes, and sitting with someone who's really going through a hard time and helping them out of the ditch, when they can't help themselves. Um, so I think those experiences at first made me bitter and resentful, but coming out of it, I think they've made me into a more gracious, more grateful friend.
No, that's great. And I think it's, friendship, like real friendship, is an honor to be the one that somebody calls when they're in prison
Yeah.
to come sit with them or when their spouse dies. Right. Like I had a friend recently who had a complete mental meltdown. Right. He was laying in bed on a work day, jabbering, and nobody could get him to calm down and say anything. And he was incoherent and, young kids around the house. Right. His wife called me and I went and sat with him. And later he was like, "Oh, I'm so grateful." And I'm like, "No, I'm amazed to be the one that gets the call."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Of everybody else. And I don't go to his church, right? But she knew that I would show up in a way that's just about what's good for him. And that's it. And he's doing great today. But it was, but I always felt really lucky to be the one that's that call. I may not be the one that's getting the call for poker night every night. And that sometimes also hurts in a getting asked out at recess type of thing from the playground at school. But when I have the honor of sitting with somebody who's lost a daughter or is really in that type of situation, then I try to show up as the best friend that I can be, and it's never a burden for me.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
an honor to be in that situation.
Two things. Some of the people who came to see me when I was in the hospital, we can delve into that in a bit if you want, but
I'm very curious about the health aspects as well, but
there were guys that I was with in the Special Forces and the Green Berets for years, deployed with, been in combat with, that I hadn't heard from for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up in the hospital, and within a week, there were probably a dozen of those guys who drove from South Alabama. I don't want to get emotional here, but
No, it's perfectly
drove
fine.
from South Alabama to come to my hospital room when people from my church wouldn't drive 15 minutes. And that spoke volume. I mean, those are the kinds of friends and people that, I hadn't spoken to them. We hadn't seen each other in 15 years.
Yeah.
But at the drop of a hat, when they hear, Doc's in trouble, hey, we're going. So those are great friendships. And so, have definitely have some amazing and great friendships. Another was when I was in seminary back in the 80s. I was dating a gal whose sister was dating Billy Graham's nephew. So
Okay.
Kevin and I became really good friends.
Like a Southern story here,
It is. Kevin and I got to be good friends. We both played trumpet. We both loved Jesus, and we both were dating these gals, and we thought, we may marry them and we'd be brothers-in-law. Neither of us ended up with either girl. Neither of us married either girl, but we remained friends. So, he introduced me to his family and got to know them. And Leighton, his dad, is married to Billy's younger sister, or was married to Billy's younger sister. Jeannie died about 9 months ago. But Leighton also ran his ministry for about 30 years before he took off on his own for his own ministry, Leighton Ford Ministries. But during this time, I think it was around September of 2019, I was in my apartment alone, just in a dark, dark place, just depressed, didn't want to talk to anybody, abandoned, felt like I was abandoned, alone, whatever, and just questioning God. I've followed you my whole life. What are you doing? What's up with this? And my phone rang. I looked at it. And it was Leighton. And I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. But it's Leighton Ford. What am I going to do? I was like, it's Leighton. I got to answer. And I was crying out to God, like, nobody sees me. I'm alone.
Right.
I'm, in the pit of despair. And so I answer, and he says, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" And I was like, not too good. And this is after Billy Graham had died. He said, "Jeannie and I are up here at Billy's place, and they live in Charlotte. Billy's place is Black Mountain, Montreat area, North Carolina." He said, "We're up here at Billy's place, just walking the farm and praying, and the Lord put you on our heart, and we've been praying for you for the past 2 hours." Here's another emotional event. And the Lord just put you on our heart, and we just wanted to call and see how you're doing.
Did you have the courage to tell him the truth?
I finally did. I think, we meet once a year in North Carolina. There's a small group of us guys that meet with Leighton. He's like 92 now, but up in Blowing Rock. So last time we were up there, I told him about this and told him, "You don't know how impactful that call was for me. And here's why." And I think that was the first time he, knew how. I think that night I was just like, "Hey, great to hear from you. Thank you." But it felt like a God kiss, like, "Okay, I see you. I hear you."
This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Midlife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. Midlife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community. We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition, and we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. When you were in the hospital and in that time, did you, even though so many people you felt so abandoned by so many and you felt estranged from so many, were there people that you could reach out to that did respond? Obviously, you had some of your teammates from the Special Forces. Yeah. Were there others that you could reach out to, that you had the courage to reach out to instead of putting the gun to your head, like your guy from men's group asked?
Right. The people that I had considered friends, there were very few that I felt at that point I could ask. But there were people that just showed up that I didn't even know. There were a group of guys that came into my hospital room and sang hymns and started praying over me. And I didn't even know who they were.
Wow.
I think I knew one of them, but, and since, we've gotten to be better friends and good friends. Right. But at the time, they just heard, "Hey, there's this guy and needs our help." And they showed up.
So maybe that was God working in your life, because a lot of guys, if they don't have somebody they can reach out to, and if they don't reach out, then there's nobody there, and then they check out.
Yeah,
right.
It's true.
So there maybe that was some of the long walk with God that you've had, that those guys could feel it, just like Billy Graham's nephew could feel it and reach out to you, right?
Yeah.
And show up. Because I think it's so, and this is really the mission that I'm on with this podcast and with Midlife Transition Mastery, is to make it that there's not guys that are doing that alone and choosing to end their life because they feel like there's not any hope, right? Which is where we get to. What was the health issue that kept you in the hospital for a couple of months? That's really tough.
Yeah, it was. I'm a stubborn man, like most guys, like most of us.
Especially type A guys that think they have it all figured out.
That's right. February of 18.
Not that I would ever know one of those. I can't imagine.
Yeah, I know, right? February of 2018, I felt a little mass in my left lower quadrant, right above my pelvic brim. And I'm a pelvic surgeon, on the female side. I used to do reconstructive pelvic surgery for women. After they had babies and stuff was falling out, and we'd put them all back together and give them a good life afterwards. So I was just wondering what it was, but it started, I'd say that was February. By April, it had grown and it was painful. It was occasionally painful, intermittently painful, but it wasn't getting better.
And you hadn't been to see anybody about it yet?
No, I'm a doctor, and I didn't have time. And, and I'll get to it.
Okay, all you doctors out there listening and all you other men out there listening, this is BS. If you don't know what's going on, go see somebody and figure it out.
That's right. So, and I've been healthy. I mean, here I am now, 58. I still don't take any medications, and I won't I think, I'm in good health now again. And I was then. I was in perfect health. I'd been in, the military for almost 15 years and thought I could do anything. And,
Were you still in the military at that time?
No, I wasn't. I got out to try to save my marriage, and that didn't save. And I wish I had stayed in. I mean,
yeah.
There are pros and cons on both sides, but
well, I'm sorry that you lost the marriage and that you lost the military Brotherhood as well.
I miss it a lot. Considered getting back in, but probably won't. But so this thing kept growing. My dad had gone back to Lebanon, and I was trying to bring him back to the U.S. So in June, I went back over with my daughter, and to try to get my dad to come back. And there was a radiology facility that I passed. Here in the U.S., you have to get a doctor's order for everything, and they look down on you.
It takes 2 or 3 months if you're here in Nashville to get an order, and then 2 or 3 months to get through the waiting line. And
and as a doctor, I can sometimes order myself stuff, but they look down on it, even though I don't think they should, because the delays, whatever. But so, and then I was working in the ER, and I was trying to get a CT there, but they're like, no, you got to check out and become a patient and, sign in. And, it's going to take 3 hours out of my shift, and I couldn't leave, my shift. And it's just difficult. Right.
Right.
And that's one of the things that has helped me fashion the new practice that I have, trying to alleviate those obstacles for people. So I was in Beirut and walking down the street, and I saw a radiology facility, and I said, hey, okay, I'm going to stop in and get a CT scan. So I walked in and said, hey, I'm a doctor from the US, and my parents were Lebanese immigrants, so I still speak Arabic.
Yeah. And so you're also from Lebanon, and they have both, so good rapport.
Yeah, they're like, okay, let's do oral and IV contrast, and you can have a 10-minute consultation with the radiologist. It'll be $250 cash. I was like, wow, that's great. There you go. Right. So I sat there in the waiting room, drank the contrast. They started an IV, went back, had the CT scan, went back and looked at the images with the radiologist, and he talked me through it. And there was, it looked like there was, like my sigmoid colon was turning to concrete, and there's some lymph nodes around it. So he said, we can't rule out cancer, but it looks like segmental colitis and all this stuff. So long story short, I won't bore you with all the details, but I started, trying to find a good surgeon that I could rely on. Ended up finding one in Memphis that I trusted because he was a professor when I was in medical school there, Guy Veller, and he was like the number one guy laparoscopist in the state. He was the first surgeon to do laparoscopic surgery and all that stuff. So I walked into him, and he said, he hadn't seen me for 20 years, but I walked into his office, and he said, you look like shit. You need surgery. I was like, well, thanks. Good to see you too.
Yeah, well, but that's a good doctor, right? Yeah. Someone that can recognize there's something seriously wrong just by looking at you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we had it set up in Memphis. I looked in Nashville, and I just had trouble finding anybody that I really trusted like I trusted him. I mean, the best guy here at the time said, yeah, I've done about 250 of these surgeries, but he didn't seem real confident. I talked to a guy, and he was like, huh, "I've done about 7,500." I'm like,
Oh, wow.
"Wow, big
Holy cow.
difference." Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a huge difference. Yeah.
around Labor Day, I felt like I got stabbed right in the left lower quadrant. Horrible pain.
Mm.
Was on the ground in a fetal position, and called him up, said, "I need surgery now," and coming to Memphis. And he was like, "No." We got a CT scan. He said, "You're ruptured. You need to go to the closest hospital." So basically, segmental colitis, sigmoid issues that ruptured, had a pelvic abscess, had a fistula formation between the colon and the bladder, and it was just a mess.
Mm.
I blamed it on 2 decades of internalizing extreme toxicity throughout a toxic marriage. Where I knew, I think at year 4, that we were in trouble. And
Mm.
I won't get into all the details.
Yeah.
But I kept trying to get it out for 20 more years because I felt, the Lord hates divorce, and I'm a Christian leader and an example, and men are watching me,
Yeah.
and I've got kids, and I love her, and I love Jesus, but 20 years later, here I am with this, just internalizing everything and feeling like
Yeah.
that was a consequence. But I think another part of it was when we were in Afghanistan, to the DoD knew about this and covered it up. And we've been trying to uncover it. But they put 3 inches of dirt on ionizing radiation, on an ionizing radiation field. And we pitched our tents on it. And they were like, "Yeah, it's all good. Nothing here." And then by the time we got, and there was nerve agent and all sorts of other stuff, biological weapons. It was an old abandoned Russian army base or Air Force base in Uzbekistan that we were operating out of.
So you lived on a toxic waste dump, a radiological toxic waste dump for a while.
Yeah. And since coming back, 20% of our guys got head and neck cancer and have died.
Oh, wow.
20%.
Wow.
But that was an
Which is like,
O2.
if you think about that from a normal perspective, a head and neck cancer, it's very, very small if there's not exposure to
Yeah.
chemical weapons. I had an uncle that died, from Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Yeah.
From that, similar to John McCain's brain tumor.
Wow. Yeah. That's awful.
But at least it was a long life, right? They didn't get it like John McCain until much later in life. But I don't think of too many that I know that are, I bet the incidence of that type of cancer is very, very low otherwise. Right? Very, very low. It's definitely not 20%. It's maybe 1/1000th of 1% or something.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that it happens to so many people, sort of says something in that population. But thankfully for me, it wasn't cancer. It was segmental colitis, rupture, severe sepsis, fistula, and all that stuff. And we dealt with it, found a doc here. Carl Van Deventer was my primary care guy. So I thought, I don't know where to go. I'll go to Centennial. He'll know. And got connected with Jason Aston. Dr. Jason Aston down at Centennial, who was fantastic, a lifesaver, literally.
And did it just take you, so the recovery was the 2 months in the hospital, was the recovery from that just to get this sepsis, infection cleaned and cured and get your energy back? And
Essentially, we had to let it cool down before they would go in to operate. So it took about 3 or 4 weeks of IV antibiotics to get to the point where we decided, okay, it's time. We need to go ahead and go after it. And multiple procedures in the interim to drain abscesses and all that stuff. But then, after surgery, ended up with an ostomy that we reversed 3 months later, and then had a abdominal wall incisional hernia that we ended up patching up to. So now, everything's fine. I'm doing great.
It sounds like you've had a lot of reflection from the health aspect of what other things might have contributed to it. But all of this was going on at the same time that your marriage was, actually, I shouldn't say your marriage was failing. Your marriage had been failing for a long time, to be honest.
Yeah,
you decided to get divorced.
Yeah.
Other relationships were estranged. You lost your father and father-in-law, and you had some sort of business collapse or failure.
Yeah. We were in business together. She's also a physician, but I had gotten to the point I felt like I would be dead before I hit 55 or divorced. I didn't feel like, the relationship was so toxic that I felt like I just physically, my body just isn't going to be able to take this. Just the intensity of the emotions. 2 weeks after I filed, colon rupture and all that. And of course, we were in business together, and that, of course, collapsed as well. And So yeah, all of that together.
So it's interesting, like how this, I mean, it sounds like it was like a sort of a great purge going on in your life all at once. Like there's a whole bunch of relationships that you thought were worth something that turns out they weren't, and those washed out. And, some key relationships washed out. Some have been repaired and come back. Some haven't. A major health issue had been developing for a long time, as you said, probably 15 years or so, but came to a head. So this whole transition period, which took a few years, looking back on it now, if we sort of took all of it as one, even though there's so many things inside it, what would you say is your biggest takeaway? Like, what is the thing that you've learned the most? I mean, again, I've only met you in the last couple months, and you're this robust guy about my age, fit, high energy. Life seems to be going very well. What is it that you learned there, during those dark years of all of that stuff put together?
Remarkably, Art, I'm still going through the learnings, so still trying to figure some stuff out, but things that I've taken away from it. And I think there's both a light side and a dark side to all this, right? A positive and a
Sure.
negative. There are very few people you can really trust with everything. Friends, maybe friends just for a season,
Yeah.
but those that are really true, hang on to them,
And maybe, I'm going to interrupt here, but maybe that's one of the gifts of these dark times is you get to see who is really a friend.
right?
Right? I never thought about that until before right now, but like you really get to see, who could be there for you when you need them.
And they're usually not who you think they're going to be.
Yeah, that's the strangest part. I have a big family, lots of siblings, and I have one brother. It's very stoic. I always felt it was hard to connect with. He wouldn't return my calls, and like for years, for decades. Right? Well, I mean, we'd talk and we were friendly, but I wouldn't say we were close. And at my 50th birthday party, he started the toasts with all these things of what I had meant to him and what I had given to him and how it had affected his life.
Wow.
I had no idea. He never said anything about it. And when we were hiking, this picture right here, from Montana in 2023, I set up this 7-day backpacking journey with all of my, it was supposed to be just with one brother, but it ended up being all my siblings, plus a bunch of nieces and nephews, one brave sister-in-law. And at that time, we had a little birthday party for him. It was a thing in our family. 50th birthday, we all throw it. Everybody shows up no matter where they are in the world. And he had said, I know you guys are sort of giving my wife a hard time because she didn't throw me a big birthday party. I didn't want one. This is all I wanted for my 50th birthday.
Wow.
Is to be with the siblings. And that's it.
That's great.
Who would have known,
Yeah.
right? That all this was going on in this guy. And he's the one, like the most loyal. If I'd had any issue, he'd have been right by my side. Right? Even though I didn't, he wouldn't return my calls and, we're going to get together. Maybe, maybe not. It was really, who would know?
Yeah. That's amazing.
So, yeah, that gift of, knowing who is really our friends and who isn't can be a gift looking back on it. And I never really thought about that before, but it's, it seems true in the moment.
Yeah, it does. Here's some other very powerful things I think that I learned. One I'm going to say for the last, but the Lord is really faithful. And there was a time when I was laying there in my hospital bed the first week, sort of wallowing in self pity.
Sure.
Why has this happened? Why have you allowed this? I've been faithful. I've followed the path that I thought you laid out in front of me. I've honored you. What's going on? And I was just in self pity. I felt like in the middle of all that, he interrupted me and said, "Stop belly aching. This is only going to be for a few months. I'm going to teach you a lot of things through it. Just be quiet and learn. This could go on for your whole life, like Johnny Erickson Tata. I mean, you could suffer through, but this is only going to be a short season. But I have a lot for you to learn." So there was that. But when I got to the very bottom, I think most of us as men, and there's several other things I want to talk about maybe, but this was probably the most impactful. As men, we can say we're not scared of things, but I think ultimately we're all actually scared of loss. We're scared of losing our reputation, respect of others. We're scared of losing the financial kingdom we've built. We're scared of losing relationships. We're scared of losing love and affirmation. We're scared of being alone. At some point, some people have to be, and we just sort of suck it up. But it's not where we were meant to be. But what I found at the bottom of the bottom of the cliff, having literally almost lost everything at the time.
Right.
Health, financial, business, respect, family, love, relationship, marriage, church, community.
Yeah.
What I found at the very bottom was I've always been vocal and strong and committed, but what I found was freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom. Because I remember thinking, there's nothing left anybody can use to leverage to make me do what they want me to do.
Mm.
Now I'm free to do what I really feel God wants me to do. And what are they going to do? Kill me? That's all I've got left.
So that was a crucible for you. I mean, that was a crucible.
Yeah.
To get to a point where you had no, Ram Dass calls it becoming nobody, right?
Yeah.
All of your stuff is stripped away. Or say from the Bible, you have to be planted, right? And
Yeah.
dead and buried in the ground in order to grow.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. And I, as I always do, I can't help myself. I guess this is a normal human thing. I reflect on that for myself and say, okay, when I've done a lot of 12-step work and, see people hit rock bottom, but is it really rock bottom? In the piece that I'm thinking about with you, is it even the people closest to you? You said even those relationships are really strained. And those can also be the strongest bonds in good ways as well. But even if those were even already really strained, then you had, and I never would have put that word with it, but yeah, that you could really now emerge from the chrysalis, a butterfly, not another caterpillar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really do what God has for you to do.
Exactly. And I didn't think they were strained. I mean, I thought my relationships were good until the bottom fell out. And then, everything just sort of blew up. And when the dust settled, that's where we were.
Before we come off of that one, because I really love that. And thank you for sharing that. I know that's very, very personal, but to have that sense of freedom, what have you done with it? Or what are you doing with it? I know this is very recent, actually. So what are you doing with that sense of freedom now? What is different in your life today than before you went into the hospital bed because of that sense of freedom?
An even stronger level of conviction, courage, commitment to do what I feel God wants me to do. Because I feel like, ultimately I'm His. I'm here for His purposes. I'm not here to build my own kingdom.
Right.
Here to advance His.
Yeah.
And what are they going to do to me? I mean, what else?
Yeah,
What are they
you've been
going to
through
take from me
everything.
that I haven't lost?
Right. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you are looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeintransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets. And how does that translate into, I was having a conversation this morning with human being versus human doing. And the fact is it's both, right?
Yeah.
We're both human beings and human doings. How this has affected your being a great deal. I can feel that, the sense of freedom and saying, hey, now there's nothing can be stolen from me. I can't be blackmailed anymore into being anything less than what God put me here to be.
Yeah.
What have you been doing with that? Or what have you started to do with that being that you experience now?
At the bottom, when I felt like I'm starting over, I had committed to just picking up things that I felt were God ordained and going in the direction that I was going to do. But one of my problems is that I say yes too much.
Mm-hmm.
So, you pick up something here, I'm not going to do anything else, but then you pick something else up, and before you know, you've got a bunch of balls in the air. So I'm back at the point of refocusing this is the year. I think up until 2024, a lot of that was spent healing, figuring stuff out.
Sure.
And when I say healing, more, heart level stuff, spiritual,
Yes.
emotional,
Yeah.
and
It's all connected. But
thinking clearly and not emotionally and all that. And, but maintaining a rich spiritual, emotional, relational life. So what am I doing with it? You'll see this year. It's going to be a great
okay.
year.
Stay
um,
tuned.
yeah. And
Omar
one,
Hamada take 2 a year
that's
from
right.
now.
And one, I wonder why this hasn't happened before, because people who've known me, I was just talking with a friend of mine who knew me from 30 years ago in med school, and we were talking through some things. And he said, I've been wondering when this is going to happen. I mean, I thought for the past 30 years, I've been thinking any year now, Omar's going to do this or Omar's going to do that. And he's not the only person. There've probably been 3 or 4 folks who've told me that in the past month. So there's a lot there, but I can't do just one thing. It's a multidimensional. I think my purpose is multidimensional. It's to affect people's lives on many levels: spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, medically, health wise,
Yeah.
worldviews, culture, the whole thing. So
Yeah. Well, I think that people are not monodimensional.
yeah,
All right. And everything is interrelated and everything affects everything else. And also, what you learn in one area affects how you can teach in another, right? And how you can relate to people and how you can be of use and be of service. So I think that makes sense. The relationships now coming out of it, some of the key relationships are those. Have you repaired some of them? Have you let go of some of them? I think it's specifically maybe about your children, your siblings. How are those relationships now? From having this sense of freedom, what have you done or not done with those?
I was surprised with my children, just because going into all that, our relationships were strong, and there was a lot there that I don't know. I should say anything
Yeah.
specific,
And yeah.
but I will say that there was a lot of parental alienation
hmm
that happened and occurred, and I felt them pull away and their attitudes change. I mean, they'd known me their whole life, but all of a sudden, Dad's a monster and he's a bad guy, and we're not going to talk to him, and all that.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that. We've gotten to the point now that all that has just about, I think, disappeared, and I've got great relationships with
Great.
all my 4 kids, and they're all great kids. But I want more. It's not where I want it. Um, it's the depth and the loyalty and the trust I've still got issues with, because I think we just have a way to go still.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but there's no, from what I can tell, there's no animosity, there's no hostility. There's a lot of love and all that, but I want more. I want their hearts. I want their loyalty. I want to be their dad.
So how do you what do you do differently in your heart to show up as their dad?
I love them. I pray for them all the time. I let them know how proud I am of them. I'm there for them.
And that makes sense. I think one of the wonderful heartbreaks that I had in 2019 was being at a monastery, Christ in the Desert out in New Mexico, and realizing that I saw my children as accessories to my life, not as
Wow.
their own lives.
Yeah.
I was reading a book called Bonds That Make Us Free. I thought it was the Message version of the Bible. I was going to take one book with me, and it was going to be Eugene Peterson's. And I couldn't find it. And as I'm running out the door, I'm looking around sort of hastily for it, which my whole life was hasty running around at the time. And I saw it and picked it up, put it in my bag. And when I got there, I realized it wasn't that. It was a similar sized book that I hadn't read that had been recommended to me a long time ago, called Bonds That Make Us Free. And that realization, and I was doing all the right things. I was loving them. I was reading them stories. I was tucking them in. I was saying I was proud of them. I was hugging them, paying for everything, But I didn't see them as human beings. I actually saw them as I had this image in my life of the way it should be and how they should fit into that image. And that was heart wrenching time. I was so the only in my little cell, my little room that I was in. The only other person in there was Jesus on the wall right above the bed, and we had a blubbery, boogery conversation that used a whole hand towel.
Wow.
But it was amazing. I mean, to have that realization, and it completely shifted the relationship with my kids. It took some time, but my daughter is the youngest. She's 19 now. And I have 2 adopted kids, so there's a lot of extra challenges there, just with the trauma that they've been through. And she talks about, well, that was before when you were a bad dad. Which of course I wasn't like a bad dad, right? I was sweet and so forth, but I didn't see them the same way. It was somehow about me instead of it being about them.
Yeah.
So that's been really powerful the last 5 years, 6 years. Where do you think, Omar, that your life would be now if you hadn't gone through that valley of the shadow of death, that dark, dark year?
If I had continued on the path I was on,
Yeah.
it was a very painful relationship, very toxic. I mean, every day there were significant issues. And I just felt like I just wasn't going to make it many more years in that environment. It's amazing what emotional stress can do to a person.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
No,
2 things. One,
that.
God hates, and I'm going to walk and talk for a second because I need a power cord.
All right.
I think, God hates divorce. And I hate. That's part of my story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know. I don't think that I don't think there were any other options. I tried so many different things: counseling, Bible studies, books, seminars, you name it. And I don't know that anything else would have worked. So on this end, I feel like, and I felt for a while, I didn't leave anything on the field. I felt like I did and tried everything I possibly could have until the very end. But knowing what I know now, I wonder, should I have thrown in the towel 10 years earlier? I mean, because, I knew that we were in trouble for years. Knowing what I know now, should I have done it differently? And I don't know. I mean,
there's no way.
Yeah.
There's no shoulds really in life. You can't know. But I do think, divorce is awful. And the only thing worse is a marriage that's really irreconcilable. All right.
Yeah.
And staying in that. I think, you know more about this than I do because I've never served in combat, but my dad would say when I was young, he'd say, war is a terrible evil, but sometimes you have to wage war on something more evil than war is.
Yeah.
And that always sort of made sense to me. Right. I understand that. I love that you're still in the middle of it. And I love that you say you don't have all the answers already because that's where a lot of people are. Right. And it's not always sunshine and roses. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's to recognize that it is difficult. And if we're really lucky, the difficulty is only for a season, but then what can we learn from it and what can we take from it to make lives better for others and for ourselves, to make our suffering worth something, right? As Viktor Frankl talks about. If you were to talk to somebody who's going through that dark year of the soul, like you went through right now, what's one thing that you would recommend, one tool, something you would recommend for them that they can do right now, like they could hit the pause button on the podcast and they could do right now to help themselves move forward, even if it's a little bit big, have the right trajectory instead of moving backward?
I'd say 3 things.
All right. Yeah, you are a multidimensional guy.
Yeah.
That's for one, I get 3.
Make sure that you're connected to someone who really cares about you.
And when you say connected, you mean like reach out, like call somebody, go see somebody, set up a lunch.
Yeah. And whether they know you or are getting to know you, make sure that you have somebody that you can reach out to, that you're not alone, that you can lean on.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is, and this is something that every Christian says, but it really matters, and that is really get in the Word. I mean, don't just have a 10-minute devotional, but just really eat the scriptures. I mean, really get in the Word and get to know the Lord and just get in the Word. And then third, get professional help, get therapy. Talk to somebody who is really good, not just any. I ended up there was this lady. Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a Tony Robbins conference. Don't hate me.
Yeah.
Um, and you break up in
Been to many of
pairs.
those.
Yeah, great. You break up in pairs and talk through the stuff that you're working through in the workbook. So there was this gal who was sitting next to me, and we paired off, and have become friends. She was a Brit. She was tatted up, and her story is, she for a while had been, an IV drug abuser, prostituted herself for drugs and all that in Britain, but turned her life around and had become a therapist. It
Yeah.
was very good. And as we were talking through some of these things, this was in the middle of all this that had been going through before the divorce, actually, but or maybe it was after. I can't remember. But she said, "You need to talk to my mentor." And I said, "Really? Who's your mentor?" And she told me, and she said, "Just call her, tell her I sent you." And our first couple of sessions, it was right before COVID, actually, because she'd never done Zoom therapy.
Oh, okay.
I was
Yeah.
her first Zoom client, but I probably saved her business because during COVID, she went to Zoom for
So she learned how to
everybody.
do it right before you were the
Right.
trial, right before COVID, and
Yeah.
then she just flipped a switch and put everybody online.
Right. And that was the one reason she was hesitating on taking me on, is because I've learned it just doesn't work except in person, but it worked. And she was amazing. I mean, she was from Boston and now living in Colorado Springs, but she was tough with me at first. I mean, really, really tough, which I guess I needed. But
Yep.
she really helped me walk through some of those dark areas. So I say those three things, making sure you have a true friend, getting in the Word, and getting good therapy.
No, that makes complete sense. And I've been down all of those roads and can vouch for that as well. And that's something that anybody can do. So, yeah, I really appreciate it. As usual, for me, the conversation went in very different places than I expected.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your humility and your willingness to open up about, some of the most difficult and trying times in your life. And I know that's been useful to me in our conversation right now, Omar, and I'm sure it's useful to our listeners as well. So thank you so much for taking the time on this snowy day in Tennessee to be on the podcast with me and give the gift of your learning to others. I really appreciate that.
Anytime. And we can always dig into other things next time, but can I leave you with one more story?
Absolutely.
As high functioning men and women, I don't know who your audience is, but we push hard and we try to get things done, and we measure our success by achievement many times. When I was at the bottom, completely emptied out of everything, and I just want to show you how the Lord works sometimes. Um, I had been discharged from the hospital after surgery. I had an ostomy for 3 months. I had just gotten the ostomy reversed, and I was laying in bed. This was January of 2019. Yeah, January of 2019. Just gotten the ostomy reversed. And Governor Mario Cuomo of New York had gone on national television and was declaring with great glee how New York now had the most aggressive abortion legislation in the history of the United States. Now, wherever you end up, whoever's listening on this issue, I'm pro-life, and I hadn't used Twitter a whole lot. I'd been very active on Facebook and some other platforms. But I tweeted, I said, I'm an board-certified OBGYN. I've delivered several thousand babies. There's no reason to abort a child in the third trimester of pregnancy. Delivery, yes. Abortion, no. And I was just 2 days post-op.
In the third trimester, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I had just been released from the hospital, fresh surgery, 2 days post-operative, laying in bed in my apartment. And I tweeted that, put my phone on the nightstand, and went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, and it had exploded. Within 48 hours, we had 10 million hits. Within 72 hours, Fox News producers were calling. And all of a sudden, here I am getting thrust onto the national spotlight, international spotlight. I mean, I was even doing, so I ended up, I'll spare you all the details, but ended up in studio in New York with Ainsley and Laura Ingraham and Jay Sekulow and all these, even Rush and all this stuff. So a lot of stuff happened. Ended up with a book deal, and I thought, I've been trying to do stuff like this for a while. And when did it happen?
Yeah,
I
when you're
was
laying in bed.
completely emptied of everything. Post-op,
Right.
laying in bed, post-surgery, my life is destroyed. And what happens? And who did that?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's not something you did on your own, right?
Nope. Yeah.
And that's something I've been reflecting on a lot this week. So I really appreciate you bringing that story up. The guy that connected us, Jason Weiss, who was on this podcast a little while ago, he talked about that if things are too hard, then it's probably not God's path for you. Like if you're beating your head against the wall, for a long time and the bricks aren't moving and your head's bleeding,
Yeah.
maybe it's time to relax a little bit and see where the flow is taking you instead of where you're trying to take it.
Yeah. So true.
And I think it's a really good message for me right now with all the stuff that I'm trying to build and create. And so I really appreciate that. And that last story was really, really spoke to me. So thank you for that. One last question, unless there's anything else you want to add. There's one last question I have for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Just where can people find out more about you? Where's the best place to connect? I mean, obviously a very interesting experience, very diverse experience, and a heart to really make a difference. Where can people connect with you?
Right now, I think the best place is social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Just Omar Hamada. I should have a website up shortly, both personal as well as this new business that I'm launching with. It's called Triapogee Healthcare, and basically reversing chronic disease, optimizing human performance, and increasing longevity.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just a lot there. Maybe next time we can talk about. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's something I would love to talk more about because I'm very curious and interested as a potential client as well for myself, because I also have very, I won't say high expectations, but there's no reason not to live the life that God's given me well.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. And there's a lot of acute care from standard medicine 2.0 that'll help with that, but it's not so much longevity and health and vitality that comes from that. That needs a more holistic approach.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
which I've experienced very much. So maybe that's on our second episode. I look forward to talking about that when you're a little bit farther down the road. But for now, they'll reach out to you on just Omar Hamada on whatever social media is a good way to connect and find out more what's going on with you. And there they can follow as you launch your healthcare, and I'll call it vitality, longevity business as well.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, Omar, once again, thanks very much. I really have enjoyed this conversation and taken a lot away from it myself, and I'm sure our audience has as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate it, Art.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.